14 of Politics of the Empire, presented by theempiremedia.com. This is our inaugural episode of 2020, and we're starting off with a whopper here. We're tonight going to be discussing the military-industrial complex. How's it going tonight, everybody?
I'm good, Dorf. What's up, man?
Not too much. So we got here tonight with us, as always, Josh Houselander and Adam Hernandez, and myself, Dorf. Normally, you'd think we would all kind of be on one side of an issue such as the military-industrial complex, but for the sake of argument, I have decided to take the side of being pro-military-industrial complex. For the sake of argument, I'm going to preface this all with, this is not my true beliefs. I am just arguing this side for the sense, for your entertainment.
I figured a bleeding heart status would be all for the military-industrial complex.
I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not. Some of this stuff I couldn't be convinced of.
Beat you to it, Josh.
Dorf, I'm glad you're taking that position because it's so easy for people like they do frequently to say they oppose the military-industrial complex. But a lot of times when you hear people say that, especially, your Republican and Democrat normies, you kind of hear, you kind of want to ask, well, do you though? Because a lot is produced from it, and it's more than just, military-industrial complex people are bad. There is more to this issue. So I'm glad you're taking that stance.
Sure. Okay. So to define the military-industrial complex here, I'm going to toss some things around, see if we can get a consensus definition here before we move forward. It's the idea that there is a powerful industry, and people within said industry that essentially influence the United States government to be perpetually at war for their own profit. Any objections?
No, not really. Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add?
It's just, I think it's the idea that that military isn't just something for defense or attack. It is something that is a money-making endeavor that needs to be fueled.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, pretty much until the Korean War has always been profitable for whoever wins. Because generally speaking, up until essentially the First World War, rather, you kept what you earned and profited off the spoils thereof. World War I kind of was arguably the last major war. I mean, there's still wars of conquest being fought to this day. However, they don't really involve any of Western civilization per se. So,
and
that means they don't matter. But for the sake of the argument, the West gave up war for conquest over 100 years ago at this point.
Yeah, no, the historical point you're making is excellent there. That has always been the unwritten rules of war, is that if your people die on a piece of land and the other team retreats, I use the word team kind of loosely here, if the other team retreats, then that land now belongs to you. Israel, for instance, has been very criticized of this, because of this, for the last 75 years or so, because they insist that that's still how war should be fought. And many times have fought war that way. And they say, no, our people died on that land, it's ours now.
Yep. And, something to the effect of come and take it.
Right.
Right. At the same, that's... All right, anyway, we're not going to dive into the whole Israel angle here. I'll never get out of that rabbit hole. Anywho, so the phrase military-industrial complex, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, was coined by Dwight Eisenhower in his farewell address in January of '61, meaning that, he cautioned the world about being wary of a growing military-industrial complex, and that's something that we should all be concerned about going forward. And to be entirely honestly, boy was he right. So I'm gonna snip this quote a little bit here, but at least include it. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. what did he mean by that? Essentially, in my mind, you know, instead of the that a certain faction, an industrial faction of the United States, is ever growing in power because they've seen how profitable war is. Don't let them continue on that, that the expansion. You could argue every war that Ike was involved with was for the good of civilization, or whatever you want to call that. However, the United States essentially rebuilding Europe for profit really got some influential people a taste of how profitable war could be, and he was worried that perpetual warfare like that would ensue because it was profitable for a very specific influential group of people. So,
and Eisenhower was in the know on both sides of that coin. He was president of the United States for 8 years, where he saw this growing. But before that, Eisenhower was not a career politician. Eisenhower was a military man. Eisenhower was, supreme commander. He was in World War II. He was in World War I, actually, also. But, as a young man. So he had spent his entire career, his life's work had been as a military officer dealing with this. And he was as far as I know, unless he hid this part, he was very proud of what he did in World War I and World War II, especially World War II. So for this to come from him should be especially, an especially intense warning to all of us.
So here's kind of where I'm going to jump back off. So that whole concept that warfare has changed, arguably circa 100 years ago, for Western nations. You don't keep what you earn anymore. So therefore, the incentive or the prize for war has changed. It's essentially the contracts that are handed out to rebuild the stuff that's been knocked down afterwards. I'm going to jump off here and say that's not a terrible thing from the United States' perspective. This is entirely from a perspective of the United States as the world, both cultural and economic hegemon. I would argue that the United States is if anybody has to wear that crown, they are the best ones to be wearing it. And at the same time, that comes at great cost and expense and literal dollars, stress, and otherwise to the people of the United States. They should be able to profit off of it as well. That doesn't mean necessarily, from my perspective, that the spoils of that should go to 5-10 people. It should be that because the United States essentially keeps trade flowing uninterrupted, securely, stably, and otherwise throughout the world, for whether it comes from the oil industry, any sort of import-export business out of Southeast Asia, and otherwise, it's a great expense to ourselves, and we don't bill anybody for that. We should be able to essentially be able to take advantage of that because we're offering that security. We should be able to take advantage of that as well. Unless, of course, we're going to essentially change how we fight wars again and, keep what we take. Which, then again, I don't know that we would have fought a conflict. Probably even Korea if we kept what we took. So not only that, I mean, we're not going to get into the weeds of what technology, industries developed for the military that's trickled down to civilian life and how that's changed and, arguably for the better, healthcare, automotive technology, et cetera, yada, yada, et cetera, to even flight. How that's improved the average quality of life for the average person in the United States. That is a side effect of it as well that I think is, one that should be a big positive for it in its, positive versus negative columns here. So that's kind of where I want to kick things off, guys. What are your thoughts about what I've laid out here?
Dorf, I don't think you're taking any sort of hardline stance here. I think, you're setting the groundwork, and I appreciate I know I tend to get, overly philosophical sometimes about topics that perhaps don't, come across as philosophical more normally. But some time ago, I kind of decided to stop, not to make this about myself, but I decided to stop focusing so much on issues and how I feel about an issue, but more so a search for the truth. And my biggest problem with the military-industrial complex and the way it operates is that it's devoid of truth. I don't think any of us really truly know what to think about it when we're never being told what it's actually doing. We like to think of ourselves, oh God, they argue. People can argue on social media for hours and thousands of threads about whether or not we're a republic or a democracy. Well, quite frankly, according to the way the military-industrial complex is run, we're neither. I mean, they don't run it either way. I mean, if we're a country that's where the will of the people is supposed to matter, and we're supposed to have we're a government by the people for the people. I mean, who are these guys? Who are the military-industrial complex? What are they doing? And I think a lot of times, because I'm not a pacifist per se, it'd be very easy for me to come on here and just take the war is bad. We need to stop killing people and get out of countries that they don't want us in. I can take that position, but that position isn't all that interesting, quite frankly. I want to know what it is. Are we fighting these wars? Because we're basically been in a perpetual state of war for decades now. Are we?
Well, pretty much an entire existence.
Of the nation?
Yes, of the nation, yes.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. We fought the Revolutionary War, and we had some peace. Then we fought the War of 1812, which wasn't soon after, and we had some peace. I mean, from 1814 to 1860... Well, no, we did Mexico-American War in there, didn't we? In the 1840s. So, yeah, we've had a lot. But at least in between those wars, we weren't fighting wars. But now it seems like we're always fighting a war, even when we're supposedly not fighting a war.
Oh, by the way, here's another thing about your point there, Josh. The pretty much default history of the world is a perpetual state of war.
Well, I understand that.
The idea that the United States is somehow unique in that regard is, historically lacking perspective. However, it's not necessarily the norm today. However, is when you expand your lens beyond your own lifetime, it's not abnormal.
Dorf, I agree with that 100%. I agree with what you just said 100%, and that actually goes to the point I was trying to make, is that those wars throughout history were wars. They were wars being fought for a purpose. Why are you fighting, hey, Rome, why are you fighting Persia? Because we want their land. Hey, Persia, why are you fighting Rome? Because we want their land. Hey,
because we want their stuff, because otherwise we don't have enough stuff of our own.
Right, or why are you fighting this war? Because we hate those people. That's often been an issue for war. Why are you fighting that war? Because we hate them. We hate them. We want to kill all of those people. I'm not endorsing that idea, but that used to be the idea for war. Now our wars there's no truth in them at all. You can't tell. They want to tell you, oh, the people are fighting over there, they're good people. We don't want to, we don't want to do this. We're doing this for their own good. Are you, though? Are you blowing up their country for their own good? That doesn't make sense. So to me, are we fighting these wars now for moral reasons? Because I can get behind that. I mean, I could get behind that. I'm not a pacifist. I can get behind fighting a war for a moral reason. Those people over there are evil, and they need to be stopped so we can rescue their poor citizens.
For the longest period of time, Josh, that kind of perspective led you to, well, we're going to engage now because if not, they engage us at a time of their choosing. So we might as well, pick the time, place, and battlefield. The United States is pretty well uniquely positioned that both our northern and southern neighbors are not a threat. Mm-hmm. Both of them are so economically and throughout their history economically entwined with us that ever since, essentially the United States got its big boy britches on, arguably turn of the 20th century, Neither of those countries have ever been a threat to even, change the border, let alone conquer the place. So, and then, the cost of moving troops and supplies and, military equipment across an ocean is so damn high that, we're essentially conquer-proof. Whereas that is a pretty unique situation to us. And at the same time, if we wanted Mexico and if we wanted Canada, they could be ours inside of a year if we truly wanted to do it. If we wanted to shed the blood, if we wanted the resources, and there would be nothing anybody else could do about it. But I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but if we wanted to, we could. It would be really, really, if we wanted to fight a decisive war for a decisive victory, it'd be over fucking quick.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Dorf. But the other point, the other side of that coin is because of our unique situation with, allies all around and a couple of huge oceans on either side of us. Because of that, we are also amazingly defensible. And like you mentioned,
we're not unique in this regard. India is essentially on the same place. They're a peninsula, and their northern border is the fucking Himalayas.
Right, but India,
you can't traverse by helicopter or by tracked or wheeled vehicle.
Exactly. So India's
Pakistan though, and
but Pakistan, hardly.
I know, but
hardly a threat.
But they've been on the verge of nuclear war for.
That's true.
Decades.
Nuclear war doesn't, lobbing nukes at each other doesn't equal conquest. That's
I
my
know,
point.
I know, but you're still. I see your point. I'm just saying that there's still plenty of tension.
Well, here's the thing.
And I wouldn't, because of that, I wouldn't compare India to the United States. Not in the least bit.
Well, I mean, the United States is within ICBM range of anybody with an ICBM too. So that's.
Yeah,
we
but
could be nuked at any time too.
Yeah, but the United States isn't. I mean, there's no big time tension with anybody with with an ICBM that can reach the United States.
Well,
fair enough. At this moment, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, but let's go with I mean, Adam's not wrong, but as flawed as this comparison may be, you did make a decent comparison to India. So, if you will, let's kind of roll with that for a second. But to me, the India v. Pakistan is akin to U.S. versus Russia. We and Russia have an adversarial,
adversarial
relationship. We have for a lot of years. You can blame us. You can blame Russia. You can just blame the idea that, hey, maybe you got to kind of have an enemy. Who knows? But despite that, us squaring off against Russia or trying to avoid war for all these decades, and India and Pakistan doing the same, India, as you compared them to the U.S., doesn't have troops all over the world. Starting little mini wars. Well, and I know you can say, let's avoid the idea that, well, they don't have as much money, maybe they would. Okay, maybe. But the idea being, as you stated, Dorf, which was a very good point, it costs a lot of money to transport troops and equipment across the Atlantic. Then why are we doing it?
Here we go.
What is over there that we're making so much money doing that it's worth that cost overhead?
I have your answer for that.
Okay.
The United States, and part of that, like in my introduction there, that the security that we provide is expensive. It's not only the work of the United States Navy keeping the shipping routes uninterrupted by pirates or state actors or otherwise. It's that presence, ever, expanding presence, a network of bases all over the world. People aren't liable to try shit which would upset the economic stability, which benefits the United States and everybody overall as a whole. You could argue that, on a permanent basis, the stability that provides is because people and, state actors and non-state actors aren't liable to try something if there's a quick reaction force that could be, kicking down your door inside of 2 hours. You're not likely to try and topple a government. You're not likely to strike a strategic oil field, because the world market, which the U.S. largely benefits from, and so does everybody else, thrives on stability. So much of it has to do with, not necessarily also the availability of commodities and the stable reliability of those commodity streams and supply chains. It relies on stocks, which for a large part, while are fact-based, they're also faith-based. And know what the first thing that people do when they're scared of insecurity is? They pull their fucking money. And so much of the world's economy is reliant on that faith that there's stability, that unfortunately somebody has to ensure that stability. And that, no one else has shown the ability or, willingness to do that besides Russia for like the last 100 years and China very recently. And out of those three people who, since the British Empire kind of stepped back, from that role in the, mid 20th century, since that, the United States wants that stability and thrives on that stability, that's unfortunately the overhead of the cost of doing business here, is that presence all over the world. And what I'm trying to say is the military-industrial complex exists to supply that, and it's a self-sustaining cycle. Not only is there incredibly large profits to be had by sustaining that cycle, but at the same time, you and I get to benefit from the stability in that market, that presence provides. And, unfortunately, that does cost money. And you know what? People should be able to profit from that cycle as well, whether it's, the government itself or, private enterprise inside the United States and the rest of the world.
The thing that, and maybe this question doesn't have an answer, but where do logic, reason, accountability, and common sense kind of play into this? If I could throw a quick analogy out. Okay, say you got a neighbor who, it snows a lot here in Michigan where we're at. You got a snowblower, right? And every time it snows, you do not only your walk and your driveway, but you do the neighbor's walk and the other neighbor's walk, and then you do your neighbor's driveway. And you're just doing it because you're a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you feel like you should do because you got a snowblower and you're an able-bodied person. You want to do it. Then that neighbor says to you, I actually would rather you didn't do that for me. And you say, oh, well, okay. And then you keep doing it. And then the neighbor across the street says, I heard that Joe actually doesn't really like it when you do that. And you say, oh, okay. And then you keep doing it. And then you do it for another year. And now everyone in the neighborhood is saying, dude, nobody wants you to do that. Please stay out of that person's yard. And just, we know you're trying to be nice, but we don't want your help. I mean, when do you stop plowing your neighbor's driveway? When do you start minding your own business and saying, okay, if the rest of the world doesn't want us here, then why don't we go home? And
okay, Josh.
To me, that is the question. Maybe the military-industrial complex is far more moral or far more just or a far more better idea than we realize. But there's only one way to find out. You got to stop doing it and then say, oh, I told you so. I told you so is a very underrated thing sometimes.
That would work. Your idea there works perfectly with the assumption that every culture throughout the world shares the same moral compass. That if we pull back, the United States, that being pull back from the world stage and essentially stop being the world's traffic cop, that everything would continue to function as normal. The amount of regional conflicts that just our presence, a couple of United States Marines sitting on a base in Turkmenistan prevents is mind-blowing if you did an absolute analysis on the whole world. The United States, if you're okay with the consequences of pulling back troops, that being economic uncertainty, panic in the markets, probably a worldwide depression, and a bunch of people starting regional conflicts and civil wars because we're not there anymore to keep them apart. If we're okay with that as a society, fine, do it. Let's do it.
Are you truly that certain that would happen?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no doubt in your mind that
No doubt.
if we
Here's
pulled
the
back,
thing.
that the world would just fall into chaos and anarchy.
The chaos, the economic chaos,
Chaos,
can
not
be
anarchy.
I
not
said that on
anarchy.
purpose in hopes
Yeah.
that it would get off on a tangent.
No, the economic chaos would be managed. It would be terrible for a year or two. However, smart people like making money. Smart people will figure out how to stabilize. You essentially wouldn't be able to run as lean as supply chains, and there'd be a lot of strategic insourcing of strategic goods. We wouldn't be reliant on Europe per se for strategic missile components anymore. I don't know if we are, but you wouldn't be relying on an ally for strategic missile components anymore, because who knows if Bob the Pakistani pirate would intercept it en route, and then that would never make it here, and all of a sudden we don't have missiles anymore. That would get figured out. It's just as long as we're okay with essentially every little regional conflict throughout most of the world going unanswered, and everybody's okay with a bunch of people dying, that's fine. We would figure it out. It would.
People
suck
certainly
along the
haven't
way, but
stopped
we'd figure it out.
dying because of the military-industrial complex. I mean, people
It's
certainly haven't.
significantly slowed down, is what I'm saying.
Has it?
I would argue it has.
I'd be certain that you're wrong, but my figures would be skewed since there's simply more people now, and definitely more people are dying now than ever before. But I don't know, Dora. I'm sorry, I don't buy into this. I don't buy into this notion at all. I don't think that we leave and all of a sudden chaos erupts throughout the planet. I mean, I don't think there's data to back that up. I don't think there's science to back that up.
Josh, you're never going to have data on that side because it's never been tried.
Right,
So you can't really get
right.
data on it.
So maybe it's time to try it. This is what Eisenhower was saying, by the way. This is what he was saying.
You're right. And here's the thing. I don't necessarily agree, Josh, with you philosophically that not being the world's police is great and all. It's just I personally am okay with the extra governmental expense from the macro perspective to ensure that stability and security of the world economic market, considering how intertwined we are with everybody who's anybody and throughout the world. I am willing to bear that burden. It shouldn't be for free like it has. You've got all of Europe who's benefited from this security with minimal cost to themselves since World War II. Start paying for it. And you know what? That's too bad, so sad that you don't like it. If you want us to stick around, and which we're going to stick around whether you like us or not, you're going to play ball, and it's going to start costing you money. Because the United States, the people of the United States, and the economic engine of the United States has bared that cost for 75, 80 years now, and we're done doing it for free. So,
well, one way to make somebody pay for something on their own is to stop providing it.
Okay.
It isn't necessarily to say we're going to keep providing, but now we're going to charge you. In fact, the former is a far better way to do it, because when you say we're going to keep doing it, but now we're going to charge you, they might say, yeah, but we're not going to pay it. Or they might say, we don't have the money. I mean, because as anyone who's got bill collectors calling their house knows.
I'm not arguing you walk into the halls of the European Union and say, you guys got 30 days to fucking figure it out. Bill, here's your invoice. Bill due in 30 days. Figure out how to get us the money. I mean, this is something you do over a period of time so national economies can be organized appropriately. Because at the same time, like if we're not going to provide Poland's national defense for it anymore, give it a couple years to build up on its own, so to stop, Soviet aggression, because the perfect example of what could happen if we disappear from that, specifically Eastern Europe, is what happened in the Ukraine. Russia says, "Oh, ethnically Russian people here, ours now." When they took over Crimea.
Are you guys old enough to remember Pat Buchanan? You know,
I am. I know the name. I'm not. I wasn't attuned.
No, you were probably barely born, if at all. But this was a guy who, member of the Republican Party, later left, but he primaried the sitting president George Bush Sr. in '92, or attempted to primary. Came damn close, considering that he was running against a sitting president. Got something 45% or something in New Hampshire. Again, very impressive for going up against a sitting president. But the big criticism of Pat Buchanan at the time was that he was an isolationist. That was the thing that kept getting thrown around. The Republicans were calling him isolationist. The Democrats were calling him isolationist. Everybody's calling him an isolationist. He's a fringe guy. He's an isolationist. That was the key word. It was the quid pro quo of 1992, if you will. It's you couldn't turn on the TV without hearing them talk about Pat Buchanan being an isolationist. And I guess when I look back at this, by the way, as a preteen or something at the time, I was probably saying, "Oh, I don't like Pat Buchanan. He's an isolationist." But now looking back, I guess maybe I'm an isolationist. I guess maybe in some ways, I'm an isolationist. Another big criticism was, because he used to say he was, very conservative, or he was, people would say he's radical conservative, but other people would say, no, he's not conservative at all. He's an isolationist. They were even still saying that. I remember when I was in college, them making that reference. But I guess when I look at it now, I'm an isolationist. I mean, God forbid we would take a tenth of that money and use it to put up defensive posture around the United States of America, because, you never know. Maybe Dorf is 100% right, and pirates and chaotic loons are going to be running.
People would be, invading North America as a result of us stepping back. It's just be okay with every other essentially region of the globe outside of like Western Europe.
Maybe we should be
to beat each other's throats.
Maybe we should be.
The prime example of it is, we have Iran surrounded by military bases. We do, strategically surrounded.
Mm-hmm. And then we wonder why they're upset with us.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, like, if we were to pull out, especially overnight, you bet your ass they're rolling tanks into Baghdad within the next year.
Oh my!
How
terrible it would be if somebody rolled tanks into Baghdad.
Well, okay, then quite honestly, it would be an ethnic cleansing war, and we'd have to be okay with the result of that, that outcome.
I mean, we rolled tanks into Baghdad for the last 20 years, and that area's a mess. And that area's a mess. So, if Baghdad was a beautiful place to be, maybe we should give it a shot. Yeah,
Okay.
Give people like me the opportunity to stand corrected when that happens. They might be rolling into Israel too, but Israel might be rolling right back. God forbid if we're isolationists, God forbid. Oh, I know. Oh man, we can't make sure everything's going. That we, all this stuff is going smoothly in China and everywhere. Like, oh my God, we might actually have to start manufacturing again in this country.
No, that would be a great result, Josh, of your proposed isolationism here. From my perspective, like I said, it would force supply lines and supply chains to insource to their country where they finish. You would also see the return of resource wars. The United States needs rare earth minerals to keep up its technology sector flying. Guess what we're pretty much out of here in the United States? Rare earth metals. Where do we get most of them from? China, Africa.
Do you think maybe we'd actually have to, we have phones now, which makes it a hell of a lot easier, phones and internet. You think maybe we'd actually have to call them up and find ways to trade for them?
Guess what the main component in your phone is? A rare earth metal.
That's fine.
Here's the thing. China could say is that they either own within their own borders or essentially own in a servant-client state most of the rare earth minerals on the planet, known rare earth minerals on the planet. They could say, nah, not selling to you anymore. Not going to do it.
Good for them. It's their minerals.
Okay. Well, guess what? If it's something that we want and we need, are you okay with us fighting a war for them?
Not really, no. But what I will say
Okay,
is...
well, that will cost the United States, this is an extreme specific example here. That could cost the United States' place in the economic and world domination hegemon. It could cost it its number one spot in the power rankings, and guess what? Then we get dictated to, and I don't know how I'd there's a lot of people that'd be interested in revenge if the tables are flipped, and I don't want to be around for that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see that scenario coming to fruition. But also, when people have an abundance of something and there's people out there willing to buy it off them, very rarely do those people turn down that deal. I mean, they want to make money and have commerce.
Josh, and that
they could.
Is what
what
you essentially currently avoid by allowing the military-industrial complex to essentially run rampant.
The thing is, 1 second, Josh.
No, go for it.
Just one comment here. If you go to war with China, it's going to probably be a Pyrrhic victory for either side, though. So it really doesn't matter a whole lot what happens, because both sides are going to be taken down quite a few pegs if that ever
Absolutely,
happened.
but that would be the new normal where you would essentially have to fight wars for resources again. Like back, that wars for resources haven't really happened in a couple hundred years. We'd have to go back to that, where that would be the normal again. It's just instead of swords and shields on an open field, it's ICBMs and joint strike fighters from aircraft carriers.
I don't know. I think there's a reason why you don't see wars for resources so much anymore, just because of where civilization is
Well, yeah, because the trade, which is facilitated by the military-industrial complex, has made that the preferred option for all parties, because everybody can at least get something. But if that goes away by the the loss of stability in world commodity markets, you might have to, the United States could be out of copper tomorrow, and guess what? We still need copper to power this damn country, because that's the preferred transmission line of electricity. You might have to invade West Africa for copper.
I really doubt that. Maybe, but I mean, okay, so I mean, let's go with that though. So now all of a sudden, we're not going to be able to have new cell phones every 15 months. God forbid. I'm thinking, shit, I'm going into business right now, working on ways to repair cell phones. Maybe we'll keep our cell phones for 5-6 years now. There's plenty over here. There's plenty here. It's just being
very,
a
next 5-year look. I'm talking more out into the distant future here. There's just some stuff that you won't be able to innovate your way out of.
I disagree. I really do. I disagree. And if that's the case, I mean, do you really think that Africa or one of these countries, after we've decided to be a peacekeeping nation, you think they're gonna not want to trade with us? We have a lot of stuff, man.
I'm not necessarily worried about Africa in the next 50 years. I'm worried about
name it. Fill in the blank.
Has over them.
Fill in the blank. Fill in the blank. Doesn't matter. I mean, pick a country. That was any country in the world. And if not, then there's other places these things exist, man. I don't buy it that the military-industrial complex is necessary to that. I don't.
I argue that it is, and that it's essential that it stays in place, similar to... Now, you can obviously thin this stuff, thin the industry that is, big military out. You can definitely thin it out and make a more lean, mean, green fighting machine here. I'm not arguing that there's not bloat, waste, fraud, abuse, bloat in the military budget, but at the same time, I think that the reason we are everywhere is not just necessarily a military thing where we can have a quick reaction force to any conflict that we want to stick our nose in throughout the world. It's that our economy thrives on the stability that provides, that nobody is essentially willing to try shit when two kids in the classroom aren't willing to start fighting each other when the teacher's standing right there. And as soon as the teacher steps out of the room, they're going to be at each other's throats. And as soon as the United States steps back from that global position, I think the ensuing chaos is something that we would be uncomfortable with.
Okay.
Not to say that the United States wouldn't survive, we wouldn't figure out a way out of it. I'm just the new reality that would take place as a result would be something that the John Q. public would be uncomfortable with.
Okay, I would venture to say two points to what you just said. I would venture to say that the United States will definitely absolutely be just fine if we stop invading all these places. Yeah, will to your point, will the rest of the world be better or worse off? I don't know. We'll have to find out. The United States is going to be just fine. We're gonna. Oh my God! All the cost of all this stuff just went up. Well, we just saved a whole bunch of money, by switching to a non-industrial military complex. But one of the biggest problems, Dorf, and I'm not even sure you realized you just did it, but one of the biggest problems with the military-industrial complex and having a world policeman and how the rest of the world looks at you when you do this, even if you are doing it because you think you're doing the right thing, is you just equated the rest of the world, the other 6 billion people in the world, you just equated them to children. You basically just said that the U.S., we got our shit together, but the other 6 billion people in
Josh,
the world are two kids ready to duke it out in a classroom, and the only thing keeping them from doing so is us, is the teacher, at the front standing behind the desk.
Josh, you're not gonna. I entirely believe that.
Wow. Well, then, and if that's the case,
I mean, if we're fine with letting them punch it out, if that's something we're comfortable with, and the results in the aftermath of that, it doesn't necessarily just two sides in a binary here. But if we're okay with this, people in Eastern Europe going after Slavs again, and the different ethnic minorities going after each other within the Muslim world, and hell, that's even before we just the stability in Africa. Even though I don't know how many people know how many bases we actually have in Africa, can't imagine what happens there as soon as we disappear. If we're okay with that resulting chaos, which I would argue the average member of John Q. Public in the United States would get very queasy about that. If we're okay with that result and that resulting chaos, then fine. We'll figure the economics out. We always will. It'll knock everybody down a peg. It'll bring us down too, but we'll figure it out. As long as we're okay with the resulting chaos after the fact, I'm okay with considering it. It's just I don't think that I'm not comfortable with it. I don't think John Q. Public in the United States is either.
I judging by the way people have been voting for politicians that blatantly and bald-faced lie to them about pulling out of places and not going to war, I think John Q. Public is absolutely okay with it. I think they're definitely okay with it, at least definitely okay with giving it a shot. And if what you said is true, I will do this. I'll kind of take the same, stance that you're taking, but other side. If that be true, if there be any truth to what you just said, then allow me to double down on isolationism and say, absolutely, let's pull out. Really, if the other 6 billion people in the world are truly just incapable of taking care of themselves and are just basically just little monsters waiting to get out of their cage, then yeah, by all means, then we should pull out and
Josh,
and let them civilize themselves.
The reason I say that is, look at the history of the world. You're in the largest, essentially sustained world, period of world peace on record. And going back to the part where there isn't essentially presumed consequences for mass warfare when it comes to religious tensions or economic tensions or we just don't like people tensions, I would assume that stuff would kick right back off.
Okay.
It had for the history of humanity, and will continue to if we decide to take a step back.
Okay, I'm not looking for gridlock here, so let me ask you. I'm not trying to change the subject if
Sure,
anyone has more,
right.
but let me ask you guys a question, if you will. Was old-fashioned imperialism better? I mean, especially
From
like
a macro perspective, I could make the argument. Not saying I would, 100% stand by it as a personal perspective, but I can make the argument that absolutely. From a macro perspective, empire was good. The British Empire was largely the most positive influence on the world since like the invention of the wheel.
Okay, I think we can actually have some common ground here, Dorf. And I know that Adam is going to disagree with this next statement, but it kind of gets us off topic. So I'm not trying to, if Adam wants to jump in on something, I'm not trying to silence you before it even comes out into the open. But let's work with the assumption here that the United States of America is, morally and ethically speaking, better than most other places. That this is a good nation, far from perfect, definitely flawed, but that this is a good nation, and that, like you said with your original opening statements, Dorf, that if somebody has to be the world power, then who better than the United States? Because we're largely a good place, and Adam may disagree with that statement. But let's kind of work on that assumption. I would tend to say that we are definitely on the better side. I think that that is true. We're definitely on the better side, closer to the side of good. And despite the flaws, that we're a pretty awesome place. So, working with that assumption, would we have been better off had we been more imperialistic than, I don't know, nation building or whatever you want to call what we do? I mean, would it have been better if in the 50s or 60s we just took over Cuba and right now Cuba was a state? Would it be better if we just had 65 or 70 states now? Actually truly tried to bring the Constitution to these places and bring a sense of freedom and liberty and, I don't know, power and equality, if you will. That's the old French thing, right? Liberty and equality. We are more about liberty and property things, but would that have been better if right now if Cuba was just a state? We did that with Hawaii, right? We actually kind of invaded Hawaii and took it over, and there were some people there that
takeover.
Yeah, it was, but what do you think it would have been with Cuba? But either way, vast majority of people in the United States, hell, probably majority of people in Hawaii, don't even realize that. We view Hawaii absolutely positively as one of our 50 states. No different whatsoever. They have the exact power in our system. They are a state, just as much as Montana or New York or Pennsylvania. They are a state. Would it be better if Cuba was a state? Would it be better if Iraq was a state, or half a dozen states, or however they wanted to divvy it up? Would it be better if Israel was just a state? We could have come in and
Josh,
actually done this, imperialistically, and maybe that would have been a much better thing to do. But to do that, you then have to jump in, fix it, then give them the opportunity. And if they don't take the opportunity, you leave. And hey, then you can say, all right, if we're going to leave, we're going to take a whole bunch of crap with us, though. We're going to, that would be the imperialistic way. But give them an option to say, hey, become a state. Join the club.
Well, Josh, you're from a macro perspective, assuming you could fold the people into the common American cloth that is that liberty and property, assuming you could culturally convince people of different, philosophical backgrounds, which I don't know enough about Cuba, philosophically to say one way or the other. But likely you wouldn't find success philosophically folding Iraq into the fabric of the United States, because the Iraqi people as a whole haven't demonstrated, at least from my perspective, that they value property and liberty the same way we do. And unless, of course, you're willing to stick around for multiple generations, put down every little rebellion, and rule with an iron fist until people can be broken into liberty and property for the win, then you wouldn't be able to fold them into a state per se, where they wouldn't essentially just try and leave every other week. Not that there is a method of leaving, seceding from the Union, but
why
once
not?
you're in.
Why not? They either like our way or they don't. I mean,
well, okay.
They would.
Here's the thing:
the military-industrial
I'm not
complex
saying that,
and the government would have you believe that they want us there. We're liberating them. We're saving them.
They may like the temporary security that it that we provided by toppling Saddam. If you were somebody who wasn't a big fan of Saddam, you were very happy the day he was deposed. You're not happy that 20 years later was still there, and largely your life hasn't gotten much better. That's a fair criticism of the United States' recent military actions. I'm sure that there's very few people within the country, unless of course you were directly on the take in Iraq, that are upset that Saddam is gone. However, what's resulted after the fact is suboptimal as well. If from Iraqi citizens' perspective, I guarantee it. There's definitely business interests and interest in the status quo that is now the current Iraqi government for us to be in around, because guess what? We not only toppled them and left them we could have left them in a weakened state, which would have left Iran could have just rolled over and conquered them, much like they tried. Those two countries fought a war for conquest 20 years prior to us rolling in there before. That would have left them vulnerable to that again. And I'm not saying they probably would have lost that war. And I don't think if you were a ethnic Iraqi, you would have liked the result of that as well either.
See, I actually think that if we respect that other nations exist, and because that's what we kind of pretend to do, right? When we go into these places and conquer them, we want to pretend like we respect their right as a nation. But if we took over the place and said, no, you're part of the United States now, you want to be a territory? You want to just be a place that we just own? Or you want to, really come,
only real option, yeah.
Or really come on board? And, well, no, I mean, the Constitution actually allows for, entry into statehood. It's actually pretty easy.
I'm talking like right away initially.
Well, sure. So they're a territory, but they're no longer Iraq. They're part of the United States. Otherwise, if we're to respect that they are an independent nation, then I respect the right of the independent nation of Iraq and the independent nation of Iran to fight a war with each other. If they don't like each other, because like I said, I'm not a pacifist. I do think there have been just wars, and I think the United States as a nation has a right to go to war when it's necessary. When our buddies were getting attacked by Nazis in Europe, we said, all right, guys, it's wartime. We avoided it at first because the industrial military complex wasn't running the nation yet in the late 30s. We avoided it at first. 1941 rolls around, we said, yeah, guys, let's do this. Let's jump in. They hit a military base in Hawaii, which sucked. I mean, I'm not saying Pearl Harbor didn't suck, but it wasn't, they didn't hit D.C.
Yeah, we weren't going to lose California to Japan as a result.
Right. So, but, we said, all right, guys, time to go to war. We did the same thing in World War I. Maybe not quite as just of a war, but same thing. Really, same thing. We avoided the war.
Wasn't Germany trying to get Mexico to attack the United States?
It was World War II.
No, I think that was World War I.
Yeah, but they...
it's the something telegram.
The XYZ telegram,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, but it's still heavily debated to this day. There seems to be more historians now who claim that they think that letter was sent by the Brits.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Just to get the United States.
Yeah,
into
that
it?
was that the Brits sent that
So
letter
yes,
pretending
you're
it was
right,
from
it's-
Germany.
It's
And
the Zimmerman telegram.
yes, the Zimmerman telegram. Yes, the XYZ affair. I'm mixing that up. That was around 1812. That was when we did that to the French, basically.
Fucking British. Man.
Yeah, and that's not proven. As far as I mean, Mexico still said, "Hey, we got a letter from
Hey, here's the thing: the Brits actually intercepted that and withheld that from the United States,
right."
To essentially influence an outcome in the way that they wanted as well. So it's not like it would be outside their capability to withhold that information.
Yeah, no, yeah, they intercepted it and then eventually, brought it to our attention. So we will never know if maybe some sort of proof would come
Or if
out.
they
But
actually were the authors.
yeah, we will never know if the Germans or the Brits sent that letter. I remember my professor when I was doing my undergrad, a professor saying to me that he swore that before he died they were going to find out that the Brits actually sent that letter, but they never did, and I'm sure they probably never will. But
all right, guys, time for closing statements here. Let's get this show wrapped up here. I think you've heard us argue back and forth, and I wouldn't say the most effective fashion. The both sides of a very, very complex issue. Like I said in the opening, this what I've argued today is not my personal opinion. This is just me taking a side for the sake of debate. Josh, however, am I wrong in characterizing what you've represented today is a reflection of your personal opinion?
not 100%, but mostly yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely not as much as you, but I certainly played a little devil's advocate myself tonight.
Okay. All right. Well, so if we either of us ever run for office, you can't hold us for this.
This skeleton in my closet is the one I'm worried about least, I assure you.
Josh isn't winning any elections either.
Hey, Adam, you got anything you want to add here before we sign off?
I mean, not much. I think that this is something that, ironically enough, this is something that will unite centrist Republicans and Democrats, as much as they may not want to admit it, but it does. So if you want to look at it, if you want to see a positive, if you're a moderate, then this is one of them. It's a uniting factor amongst the middle. So, but I think I think the military-industrial complex. It's something that helps sell a faux patriotism, and it is something that is, in my opinion, been more of a huge detriment to the United States rather than it's helped. So,
okay.
Well,
anything else, Scott?
Adam, you say centrist Republicans, but people who I don't necessarily agree with this label, but people who tend to be libertarian are often labeled as far-right Republicans because of their views, and they certainly do not support the military-industrial complex.
Oh yeah,
if that is only for financial purposes, or tax purposes. So yeah, I mean, I think that we avoided this part of it probably for good reason, but I think that when you hear people talking about shadow governments and people being lied to, this is what they're talking about. This is the stuff that they're not. I just wish they would come clean with it. And if it was true imperialism, I would be more okay with that. If it was true, hey, we need those resources, so we're coming in and taking them, I'd be more okay with that. If it was, this is the morally right thing to do, I'd be more okay with that. So how about some clarity?
Josh, just one thing, Dorf, before we get off tonight. Just a quick response to Josh. I don't think it's so much of a shadow government thing. I think if people really look at this, I think that the answers are there for you. I mean, I think it's abundantly clear that what the military-industrial complex is helping. I mean, who they're helping, and what it's for. I don't think there's really any shadowy type of government about it. I just think that it's something that that's in plain sight. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to make it seem like what they're doing and what they support is something that is benefiting only the very few, as opposed to the many in the the United States and the world. So
I think you're largely right about that. The main thing, this is a term that I avoided for the sake of this show, but since we're closing, I'll throw it out there now. But the idea of false flags, which do happen, the military, not just our military, but many militaries do this. The idea of false flags certainly leads a shadowy government aspect to the to the discussion.
I mean, state-sponsored false flags. I mean, that's a tactic that's been around in warfare forever. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's nothing new.
I like wag the dog better when we're talking about wars and shit like that.
All right, guys, let's wrap it up here. Let's end on that. All right, that has been episode 14 here at Politics of the Empire, presented by theempiremedia.com. Our next episode will be February 4th. That's in 2 weeks. Topic to be determined. I'm kind of voting for privacy. We're gonna, modern privacy rights. We're going to discuss it here amongst ourselves once we go off air. So for Josh, Adam Hernandez, I am Dorf. We'll see you all in a couple weeks.
Thanks.
See ya.